My interest in addictions comes from my work with the Women's Federal Prison in Kitchener. I'm the institutional physician there, and I run a methadone program. Prior to starting there 6 years ago, I really had no experience in addictions whatsoever. Part of what I thought was really interesting about Turning Point was the alternative approach to managing addictions. The non-drug approach is something that is different from what I had seen, certainly in the practice that I have in Kitchener and in the practices of other physicians that I was aware of. They used a lot of alternative therapies that I had personally had some experience with, that I thought had been helpful for me. And I was interested to see that they were offering them because I wasn't really aware of other programs that were, things like Reiki and tapping, emotional freedom technique, auricular acupuncture, just a wide variety of programs like that. I actually heard about the program through a friend of mine who is a Reiki master, and she was doing some work with Turning Point, and through a patient of mine who's a personal friend. When I met Tammy and John, I was really impressed with their energy and their enthusiasm for the program and for what they were doing. My background prior to coming into medicine is a little bit different than the average physician. My undergraduate degree was in psychology and English. I had done some work in counseling. I had done some work in shiatsu massage. I had actually thought about going to the naturopathic college in Toronto, but I was accepted at McMaster for medicine first. So I already had an interest in those areas, and I didn't come from as I hadn't been really ingrained with the whole scientific process and scientific method to the same extent that other people were. Certainly in terms of what I learned in medicine, a lot of the techniques that people use are definitely not explainable through a Western scientific framework. If you look at something like homeopathy, from a medical perspective, a homeopathic remedy is basically just water. And there's no known process that a molecule of water can transmit an energy signature through a variety of dilutions and become stronger as it does that. There is no actual molecules of the original substance in the strongest homeopathic treatments. In that sense, I think about the fact that when I was in high school, to have imagined the internet and how we would all be using personal computers and phones in this day and age, which really, I mean, it's about 30 years, 40 years, the advances in knowledge are so incredible, and our understanding has changed so much that I'm willing to accept that there's the possibility that there are things that we simply haven't learned yet, that we may in the future. I tend to be more of an empiricist. If it works, I'm willing to use it, whether I understand it or not. So there's some of the techniques where I don't really dissect them too deeply. They're based on a different worldview entirely, and you can't explain them necessarily in a Western model, so I don't. There's people who use, for example, homeopathy, get results from it. It may be simply that it's a very good way of harnessing the placebo effect, but even if that's true, the placebo effect is the majority of the effect of any medication. Most pharmaceuticals only have to be marginally better than the placebo effect to be allowed onto the market. And certainly they have the potential to do a lot more damage and cause a lot more problems than a homeopathic remedy. There is definitely research that looks at using homeopathy, particularly in animals, that shows some effect. I don't need to be able to explain that to be willing to have my patients use it. I think that there's a time and a place for it. If you were having a heart attack or your child had pneumonia, it wouldn't be the approach that I would recommend. That's certainly been my own experience in dealing with my health issues. There have been some that have been very well addressed by medicine. There's been a lot of others that haven't been, and I've looked outside the traditional models and explored alternative therapies for myself and found some of them to be very effective. I think a lot of the success in the program comes from the amount of support that the guys get while they're in it. They have people with them all the time to help them address any issue that comes up for them. They have yoga, they have counseling, they have family work, they have people preparing food for them, they have massages. They're not left alone to try and muddle through as best they can. I think the other thing about the program that makes it more successful is the long-term aftercare. Patients are involved with the program for 2 years after they complete it. They're involved with personal counseling, they're involved with family counseling, they're involved with their social group counseling. And I think it's that accountability and the chance to work through real life situations as they come up with the support of a group that makes a big difference. I think that one of the things you have to look at first is what you mean by holistic. Because to me, a holistic approach means looking at the patient from a physical, a mental, a social, and a spiritual point of view. That perspective is already taught in the medical school. What isn't taught is how to actually accomplish it. So we spent a lot of time being trained in looking at the physical aspects of illness, making a diagnosis, and coming up with a treatment plan. But how do I look at the emotional or the social aspects of a problem? What would that practically look like in my office, in the time frame that I have to deal with people? That's something that we were certainly never taught. So I think looking at that particular part of the process and coming up with more practical strategies for how we would incorporate those aspects into our medical practice would make a big difference. In terms of the alternative therapies, there's so much medicine that you have to learn in medical school that I don't think it's really important for people to pursue any kind of in-depth study of alternative therapies. What I think is more important is for people to be open to the idea that there are alternative therapies that operate from different worldviews and that they have their own successes.